I can finally say November is over. Let's check out what I read. All right, guys, welcome to my November wrap up. If you follow me on my vlog, you'll know that November was an incredibly rough month. I did not get as much reading done as I had hoped. But as I opened up Goodreads to review, I got more reading done than I thought I did. So I'm actually pretty happy with how the month turned out. I ended up reading, I believe, 7 books. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 7 books for November. I really thought I was closer to like 4. None of these books were a physical copy. All of them were audiobooks except for one, which I read as an ebook in Libby. And this is when I had started months ago, and then I put it aside for a while because it just wasn't driving with me. And then I finally finished it. The first book that I finished in November was How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. I enjoyed this book, but it did not match the synopsis of what it said it was supposed to be. So the synopsis is basically a guy who has a medical condition that causes him to age at like, I think they say like 1/16th the rate of everybody else. It usually shows up during puberty. And so he is not exactly immortal, but he is very resistant to diseases. He's very resistant to injuries, things that could shorten a lifespan of a normal person. And he ages incredibly slowly compared to the people around him. So that in and of itself is an interesting premise. But the rest of the synopsis talks about this secret society that kind of protects these people with these conditions. And sort of keeps tabs on them, finds people who are developing this condition or who manifest it in puberty to recruit them. And his daughter, who he loses touch with because he feels he has to leave his family because it's safer for them, his daughter ends up growing up and having the same condition. So then he spends hundreds of years searching for her. And I thought, okay, secret society, genetic experimentation is part of the reason that they're so afraid of becoming known. And, all these elements sounded really, really interesting. And in the end, none of that really played that big of a part. It was simply a guy who was struggling to live through the centuries as he aged out of every generation that he saw pass by. It wasn't bad. It wasn't badly written, but it wasn't great. It wasn't very gripping. It wasn't very exciting, which is what I expected out of it. It ended up being a pretty sweet story, honestly, but nothing that really kept me all that interested. So I was glad that it was an audiobook and that I didn't really have to devote my full attention to it. I think it's something you can easily read while doing other things and not really have to give it too much of your focus. It was a sweet book, but it just wasn't all that great for me. So I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. The next book that I read was In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle, I think is how you pronounce it, Serle. This was another book that did not at all match the synopsis, but in the best way. I was kind of hesitant to read this because I couldn't remember why I put it on my my Libby request list, because I just have totally random things in there, and I thought, okay, I must have thought about it at some point, but we'll just go with it and see. So the premise, the blurb on the back, talks about how this girl, Danny Cohen, she's an A-type personality. She's a real high achiever. She has her entire life planned out year to year. She is engaged to somebody she loves. She knows exactly where she wants her home to be. She knows exactly the job, the company, the title, the position that she wants, what schedule her promotions she wants those to be in. And everything is incredibly plotted out in her life. And that is how she enjoys living her life. And then one day after she gets her dream job, her entry into this dream job, she wakes up. She finds out that the date is exactly 4.5 years in the future. She's in a completely different apartment. She is with a completely different man that she's never met before. And she only has a few hours in this time period where she realizes it's not a dream, it's not a hallucination. It's as though she woke up 4.5 years in the future with no memory of having lost any of that time in between. And then she falls asleep and then wakes back up in her everyday life. So now she has to decide, does she want to figure out what happened? Does she want to pursue that life? Or does she want to try and avoid whatever causes her to end up there in 4.5 years? And that's what the title of the book is in reference to. In 5 years, her entire life is looking to be incredibly different than what she has planned out for herself. I really thought this was going to be a romance, and romance is not really my preferred genre. It's just a personal taste thing. But I gave it a shot anyway, and in the end, this really did not feel like a romance to me. It was about relationships, but it was about relationships with your significant other, with your best friends, with your workmates, with your parents, your relationship with yourself as far as how you view your identity and your future and how much that defines who you are. And there were romantic elements because, it brings up that she is engaged at the beginning of the book and then she wakes up with somebody who is not her fiance in the future. But it didn't really focus on the romantic element. It focused on specifically her and her relationship mostly with her best friend and how that relationship has seen them through the years and what the future looks like for them. I would probably, I don't really know what I would call it. Kind of slice of life, a little bit of a romantic element. But if you're looking for a book full on romance, the relationship, the budding romance between two people, this is not it. If you're like me and you don't mind some romance in the story, but you don't want that to be the full plot of the story, then this might be right up your alley. I thought the writing was really good. I stopped at a few different points. Some of the dialogue just hit, and I really, really did enjoy it. And I enjoyed seeing the elements that don't seem to fit at all 4.5 years into the future. These pieces that she kind of sees of her life and this place that she's living and the decor and everything, and how by the end of it, everything connects and you're able to see very realistically where that alternate path of life came from. So I actually really, really enjoyed this. I gave this like 4 stars, I think, 3.5, 4 stars. 3.5, 3.75. I definitely liked this much better than How to Stop Time. So if you think that kind of story and that character focus, it's not a plot driven story, it's a very character focused story, I would definitely check out In 5 Years. So the next book that I read was Death on the Nile, a Hercule Poirot mystery by Agatha Christie. I feel like at this point I am now having to read an Agatha Christie book every month or I don't feel complete. I don't feel like I've accomplished anything. I am absolutely loving Agatha Christie as a mystery writer. I really, really love the Sherlock Holmes stories. I like Arthur Conan Doyle's writing of Sherlock and of Watson. I like the mysteries of it. But the stories end up being so much shorter than what I'm looking for. And so even the Agatha Christie mysteries, I wish they were longer. But they do tend to be quite a bit longer than most of the Sherlock Holmes series. And so I kind of have flown through some of the Sherlock stories throughout my life, and Agatha Christie is giving me a little bit more, content, a little bit more meat to the stories, and I'm really, really enjoying them. And I do really love Poirot as a character and as a detective. He does remind me a lot of Sherlock Holmes in how he approaches you see but you do not observe method that Sherlock subscribes to, which is everything that you see, every piece of information is important. But what's interesting about Poirot is that he is very tuned in to people and their emotions and their motivations, whereas Sherlock, while he does factor that in, he is less of an emotionally sensitive person, and so he is looking for cold, hard, choking. He is looking for cold, hard clues to go off of. And Poirot, while he's also looking for those clues, he's also taking into account personalities, motivations, greed, and desperation and convenience and all those things. And I'm really enjoying them. So Death on the Nile, I gave 4 stars. It did have some elements that, and this is, I think, kind of known about Agatha Christie and her works. If it was written today, it would probably not be written in the same way. There are some wording choices, there are some characters, very, very minor background characters that are, she treats them as part of the setting and part of the aesthetic and the time and place of the novel. And when I'm reading Agatha Christie, and when I'm reading any novelist from a prior time period, I try very hard to not go overboard with my expectations of comparing how they write and how they talk to today's ethical and moral standards, because those are just, they're not going to align. And even people with the best intentions from prior time periods are going to write things and say things in ways that we don't find acceptable today. And I try to separate, this is when this was written. And there is still definitely a conversation to be had about some books, some authors of prior time periods that maybe you just can't overlook because things are so egregious. I don't find that with Agatha Christie, especially some of the edits that have been done to her work in later printings. So I'm just going to put that out there. If you don't feel comfortable reading her because of, what you've heard or what you've seen in some of her works, completely understandable. And I personally just still enjoy the work, and I just don't have a problem with some of these period works, honestly. So Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie was definitely a 4-star for me. The next book that I read was another Matt Haig book. So he wrote How to Stop Time. This one was Reasons to Stay Alive. And I actually read this simply because it came up as available in Libby at the time. And I didn't have any other audiobooks that were available to me. So I had it on my list and I picked it up. And I actually had originally put it on my list thinking of somebody in particular, and I kind of wanted to vet the book out and see if it would be something that they would be interested in. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. I liked this a lot better than How to Stop Time, and part of the reason is because this was not a fictional tale. This was the author's personal experience suffering from severe, crippling depression and anxiety combined. I personally suffer from anxiety, and this month got hit with some pretty strong depression, which I really never dealt with. And to feel that on top of my already well-known anxiety issues was an incredibly new and unsettling experience for me. And so I just happened to read this book 2 weeks before I got hit with that. And I was very glad that I had had the experience of reading it. And it's not because I need reasons to stay alive. It's not, because I'm in a state where I would be, considering harming myself by any means. But sometimes you gain a lot of value from reading and or hearing the experiences of others who suffer with something similar. And I really enjoyed the book because he was very honest about his experience. He was very honest about his physical manifestations of those symptoms. He was very honest about where his mental thought process was and his emotional thought process. It seems like he pretty much laid bare his experience without any kind of issues with, shame or embarrassment. And I really appreciated that. He also goes into talk about different treatments that he attempted and whether or not they worked. And he found that for him, he never found a pharmacological, a pill that just made things better. So he ended up not really feeling like he was able to manage his condition with medication. But he very clearly and repeatedly talks about how this was his own unique experience. And that does not mean that he is advocating that other people don't take medication or don't try medication, that medication is bad, that medication just doesn't work flat out. He was very, very clear to say that this was his personal experience trying different medications under a licensed professional, mental health professional. And I think that that is really important because sometimes people go into books and they look for the answers. They look for things that will help them with what they're suffering because they feel a connection. They feel understood by somebody else. And it's really important to understand that even if if it seems like your experience in mental health issues and even mental health crisis is very similar to another person, even if that's the case, the solution, the treatment may not work for you the way that it works for them, and vice versa. So I appreciated the way I thought he handled the matter and the subject material very delicately, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I think that because this was his personal experience, it was very easy to just sit back and listen. He actually narrates this himself, and so you had a very authentic voice matching the story perfectly. And so I do recommend, if you're going to read it, if you're going to pick it up, I would definitely recommend trying out the audiobook. I really enjoyed that. And he talks about not only his experience and what it felt like and how long it took for him to get to a place where he felt better and not cured, not completely gone, but just better and livable and to the point where you can enjoy life again. And then he does have a section where he had actually asked his reader base, I think via Twitter, what are your reasons to stay alive? And he puts a lot of those in the book in his section. He talks about the things that are so important to him that keep him going on a really bad day because he still has really bad days. And then he shares what other people have shared, and it can be something incredibly profound, and it can be something incredibly simple to somebody else that you wouldn't think that that is a thing that is somebody's reason to continue pushing through. And for that part alone, I found a lot of value in it. So I really liked it. So I gave Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig 4 stars. The next book that I read was The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. I had no idea what this book was about. I didn't know the plot. I didn't know the story. I had watched another YouTuber mention it as one of her favorite works when she read it. But she really didn't talk much about the story. And so I went in pretty much blind. I did know that the writing in it was supposed to be absolutely beautiful. And that was about it. So I'm gonna kind of do the same thing. And I don't want to talk too much about the story because I do think experiencing it the way that the book is written is very important. And because the book shifts between perspectives and time periods, it's really difficult to give an overall picture of the story without kind of spoiling some of the experience going along the way. But basically, it does follow the life course of one family in India, and there are 2 twins. Of course, if they're twins, there's going to be 2 that are the main characters that it follows, a boy and a girl. And it's about their life growing up, and it's about specific things, experiences that kind of mark major catalysts in their life and the lives of their family members. The prose is absolutely beautiful. It is the definition of lyrical. It is full of similes, full of metaphors, but never feeling overly so, never heavy-handed, never so much where you're just like, can you please just continue the story, because I don't need to hear about, this thing 10 different ways. You never feel like that. She weaves it in as she moves the story forward, and I think she does a fantastic job of it. One thing that really hit me in this book is when it's described how the little girl found that she had the ability to really hurt the feelings of somebody that she cared about. And as a young child, that first time that happens, where you hurt somebody with your words and you didn't mean to, but you were upset, and you were throwing a tantrum or whatever, and you say something and you don't even realize that the words that you're using are so hurtful to this person, but you see it when it happens, that you've really cut them deeply. And it talks about what that experience does to her, and it gives it the metaphor of a moth, which the reason it chooses that is also in this story. A moth that alights on her heart, and its wings open or close depending on how she is feeling about her interaction with this person who she's hurt their feelings. And it stays with her the rest of her life. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing to put in a story, because you would never maybe consciously think about it, but I think every single person can really think back and pinpoint, maybe not the first time, but one of the first times as a young person, as a child, when you realize that you have the power to hurt other people with the words that you use, and what that does to you, and that you do carry that with you the rest of your life. You may not consciously think about it, but when you stop and think about it now, years later, you can see how that has affected you, how that's impacted you, how that's affected how you talk to people, how you interact with people, how you deal with people, and how you feel about that afterwards. So, it was one tiny piece of it, but to me, it just hit very, very close to home. And I really appreciated that there were those small things that make all the difference that you don't even think about. So I gave this either 4 or 4.25. It's really hard for me to rate it, but at least 4 stars for The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Okay, the next one, not so pleasant. I finally finished The Gradual. This is by Christopher Priest. I had started this... Oh God, when did I start this? I started this in August. It felt like way longer than that, but I started this in August. So this is a story about a guy who is in kind of a militant state, country, fake place, an imaginary place, but it definitely has some real world feelings to it. And he finds that this island grouping off the coast of his country, they're not supposed to exist. And then the government slowly starts to kind of acknowledge that they do exist. And then eventually, because he is a composer, he is allowed on a government-sanctioned musical tour to accompany an orchestra with some of his composed works and works from other composers to tour this island grouping. And when he goes to these islands, he realizes, as does everybody else on this tour, that time flows differently between each of the individual islands and between the rest of the world at large. And when he returns from this tour, at the beginning of the book, every single person who has gone on this tour has lost 2 years of their lives, and they were only gone from the country's perspective for 9 weeks. So that's basically the premise. And I thought, okay, this sounds fascinating. Time travel, time flowing in different ways, in different directions, at different paces, and how you deal with that and how you can use it to your advantage. Because the other part of the story is that he's looking for his brother who left in the military years ago and never returned. Great premise. Terrible execution. Now, if you go into Goodreads, this is a very highly rated book. It's like 3.7 stars, I think, on average. I had to give it a 2. To me, really, it's more like maybe 1.5 stars. Now, if you go through and you read the high reviews, I think if you are a musical person, I think if you understand music and composition, maybe this will resonate a lot more with you. But there was one reviewer who actually said, this is really like an authentic or a really significant piece that's based on like monistic chants. And, the pacing of the book is that way. It went over my head. Maybe this book is just not meant for me. I found this book incredibly slow. The entire thing about his brother that they try to suck you in with on the blurb on the book is like the first couple chapters and then like the last couple chapters. In the middle, barely anything happens, except you follow a very whiny man. He ends up going back through the islands, and the premise on the book is that he goes and he becomes adept at using these time flows, understanding them. That I don't know where they got that from. That does not happen in the book. He just goes on an island hopping extended vacation and whines about it the whole time. Like, he understands that time flows differently, and that if he doesn't deal with the groups on the islands called adepts or adepts, I don't know, however you want to pronounce it, that he could really jack up his life, his timeline. He knows this. He knows that the process to deal with this on every island when he arrives is really weird, and it can be very long and uncomfortable and bothersome. Knowing this, he argues with them a good 50% of the time, and he just shuts up and follows directions the other 50% of the time. Most of the time, he asks a million questions about, why do you have to do this? Why do we have to do it this way? Why are you doing that? And he never gets an answer. And then the one time they actually start getting chatty and start to kind of give him some information and explain things, he's just like, I don't care. I just want this to be done. No. Just no. Either you don't care about the time shifts and you're just gonna roll the dice, or you're going to follow the instructions every time. Just grow up and pick one and live with the consequences. Oh my god, it was so annoying. It was just so annoying. And then it rushes through the end and it wraps it up in and the chapters are incredibly short. This is the one physical book that I read. It was an e-copy, and on my iPhone at the smallest font, the chapters were 1 or 2, maybe 3 screens long. So it's got 80 something, 90 something chapters. So the first maybe 5, maybe 10 chapters, and that's a stretch, are about his childhood, setting up the story. Nothing happens until the last 6 or 7 chapters where they just wrap it up. And I'm the pacing of it was agonizing, and that's why I ended up dropping it the first time. And even though I feel like I knew it was going to be really boring and unenjoyable, I still wanted to finish it because I just don't like DNFing books unless I find them completely unreadable, completely offensive in some way. So I made myself get through it. And I feel like I lost years of my life, and I want that time back. All right, so the next and final book that I read I almost said July. November was Nappily Ever After by Trisha R. Thomas. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I really, really liked it. So this is the story of a young black woman who all her life had been going to the salon every week or every other week and sitting for hours and dealing with the atrociously long and sometimes agonizing process of getting her hair straightened, the relaxers, the treatments on it, the straightening, all of it from the time she was a little girl up through her adulthood. And she was known for her long, straight, beautiful hair. And she's kind of starting to question her life, question the direction of it. She is sort of engaged to her longtime boyfriend, but nothing seems to be going on there. He's a doctor. He's trying to finish his medical school, which means he's not actually in med school, but he's doing his rotations. So he's still in the medical programs, and he doesn't really want to deal with big life changes like getting married and all that stuff until he's done with it. But he's been pushing it off in different, we'll wait till I get to this point, and then we'll wait till I get to this point. She wants more out of her career, and she's really not getting any traction in the job that she's in. And so she decides to make a pretty big change to her life. She basically kicks her boyfriend to the curb and is like, listen, if you don't want to be with me for the rest of your life, then maybe we need to go find other people. She decides she's going to try to take the reins of her career and advance that. And part of this freedom is to not be tied to the weekly salon visits that she talks about. You know, there are times she couldn't afford it and she went hungry to get her hair done. And the reason that so many Black women are really imprisoned by their hair is because of how the rest of, aka white society, views Black women's natural hair. And so it's considered unprofessional or exotic or any number of other completely inaccurate and offensive terms if it's not straightened. And so she decides, you know what, I'm going to shave it off. I'm not going to go with braids. I'm not going to go with anything that is going to cause me more work. I'm going to shave it off and just go really, really short. And you know what? I'm done. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to be tied down by it. I don't have to be made, identified by it any longer. And so that's where the book starts, is getting her hair cut off. And the way that people interact with her from then on, including her family, including her friends, including her boyfriend, her coworkers, and how she feels in her own skin without having those long, straightened locks of hair that has been kind of a shield for her for many, many years. I really loved the perspective of the book. I really enjoyed the story. I know so many of my friends who have dealt with doing the hair straightening and the relaxers. But I also know that from the time I was a kid until now, I'm seeing so many more of them embracing their natural hairstyle. They are shaving it down, or they are going with the braids that they've always wanted to go with, or they're going with locks, and it's or just a natural afro. And I love to see how every single person does their hair differently and how they feel in their own skin by having a lot more freedom, feeling like they have more freedom to choose how they want to have their hair. So for me, I felt like I learned a lot from this book about what Black hair means to especially Black women. And for that, I really appreciated this story and the voice that this was told in. And it was really interesting how it was written, because the main character is told in first person. But when it flips perspective to like her boyfriend, it's written in third person. I don't know that I've read a book written that way before, but it was really interesting, and I think it was very effective, because you're supposed to be identifying most with the main character, but it does help the overall understanding of the story and all of the people involved and how they're feeling about things when you do get to see their perspectives, but from third person. So I gave this, I think, 3.5 stars. And the reason it wasn't higher is because I will agree with some of the people on Goodread who felt that the messaging in this, as far as it relates to self-acceptance, was kind of off. So it flat out says this. I mean, it's one of the lines of the book is, you can't love other people if you don't love yourself. And I disagree with that idea, first of all, but it's funny because those are the author's words, but having read the entire story, that doesn't feel like the message of the story. It feels close, but just kind of clunky. To me, I felt that, I'm just going to look up my review, because I think I actually wrote it down. Where's my review? How do I find my own review? Yes. Okay. It's at the top, in case you didn't know that. So I see the low ratings on here, and the biggest issue people seem to have is about messaging. The heavy-handed, you can't love anyone until you love yourself, turned a lot of people off. And I completely agree with that, to some degree. I do think that the message intent was different, And I think it was throughout the story conveyed more subtly about how when we have low self esteem and when we have low worth and we struggle with that, we struggle with our identity and our purpose, we are at risk of projecting those insecurities, usually unconsciously, onto our relationships, whether that be with our significant other, our friends, our community, our coworkers. So, when we compare ourselves to other people and when we have that low self esteem, that low level of confidence, I think it's more about understanding how you can project those insecurities into your relationships with others and see things that aren't there, or you don't see the solidity that is there because you are struggling with those feelings. It's similar, but it's different than just you can't love yourself or you can't love others if you don't love yourself. And I think that subtlety is very, very important because I think if the author at the end had kind of left it without kind of shoving that down your throat, her work would have stood on its own a little bit stronger as a more subtle, nuanced message that still came through very, very clearly. Or at the very least, I think her wording could have been, it could have addressed it as a more nuanced feeling instead of just kind of the heavy-handed way that she sort of just plopped it onto the page. So for that reason, I did kind of, I couldn't say it was a 4-star. It did feel a little heavy-handed in the conversations, the dialogue, the messaging when it came to that kind of idea. And I think she could have done a better job of being a little bit more nuanced about that. But I understand the sentiment, and I think that's really what she was trying to get, was because, the way that she wrote the book and wrote the characters prior to that, it was a lot more nuanced. And I think she was very successful in that part of it. So I would say 3.5 stars for Nappily Ever After by Trisha R. Thomas. Those are all the books that I read in November. And it feels like not that many books, but honestly, I'm just very happy that I was able to get through as many as I did. I think for the next few months, my life is not going to get any less busy or crazy, and so I'm really going to be dependent on audiobooks to kind of get my reading goals in. And I did find a bunch of books on Chirp that were on sale throughout the month that are very, very interesting to me, and so I did end up kind of hauling on different days, their daily deals. And so I do have a pretty decent library right now of audiobooks that I now own on Chirp. I do have a membership with, what's it called? Audible, where I have a couple of books from a free trial. I did let it extend, and so now I'm in my second month, I think, of my Audible paid membership. So I do need to go on Audible and start listening to the books, but I think I chose books there that are a lot more contemporary and very, very long, and so they were quite expensive, which is why I ended up getting them in Audible. So I know that the ones there are going to be quite a time commitment, so I don't know exactly when I'm going to be able to get through that library. And then I'm still very heavily dependent on the audiobooks and the ebooks that I'm able to get through Libby. So I don't really have a plan for November. I'm just going to see, each time I finish a book, I'm going to scroll through and see what I have available that is interesting and go from there. So we will see how the month goes. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful December. I hope if you absolutely adore winter, like my favorite booktuber Emmy does, that you have an absolutely lovely winter with as much cold and snow as you want. If you hate winter, I'm so sorry. It'll be over in a few months. I kind of fall in the middle. I adore snow. I absolutely adore snow. Can't get enough of it. I hate that the sun goes down at 6 p.m. And I do think that's a big part of why November has been so difficult for me. It really hit me hard this year. Losing my daylight and driving to work in the dark or waking up in the dark and then coming home in the dark. It's a struggle. And I'm hoping for some snow. Because if I have my snow, I feel like I will enjoy my winters. So, and I know some people absolutely hate snow, so I kind of feel bad hoping for snow. But either way, I hope you have a wonderful December coming up. I hope you're able to enjoy whatever the season looks like for you, whether you're in a warm climate or a cold climate. I hope you get some excellent reads in, and I will see you in my next one.